So you've sat through 2 hours or 2.5 hours of troubleshooting. You've sat through 30 minutes of diagnostic tickets where you have essentially read through 1,000 pages of junk and figured out what the problem is. And now you're at this point where you need to actually configure everything. Now, what I want to do is I want to back up here for a quick second. And I want to make sure that you understand that the troubleshooting section is going to be where Cisco essentially tries to really test your ability as a CCIE. Most of the candidates that I deal with and most of the folks that I teach, if they can make it to the config section without a problem, most of them pass. You need to have patience though, because in the configuration section, you are going to go through a lot of devices, having to configure a lot of different technologies, and you're really going to be tested. You're going to have a lot of patience. You're going to have to be able to work through frustration, because you're going to be asked to do a lot of different things and you're going to have to do it a lot of different times. You know, you're going to have to implement OSPF a dozen times, EIGRP a dozen times, BGP twice as many times. I mean, you're going to have to do a lot. You're going to be implementing the same things in succession, and it's going to be very repetitive, okay? So you need to have patience and you need to really be able to work through a very high frustration level. The other thing that you're going to really need to do in order to get past this section is to be able to work under just sheer exhaustion. I mean, you didn't sleep the night before, you woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, so maybe you've had 3 or 4 hours of sleep. You get to the testing center, you've sat through 2.5 hours of troubleshooting tickets that are just obnoxious and stupid. You've gotten past it. Then you had to read all this obnoxious amounts of information. You were able to successfully pass it. Now you've gotten back from lunch and you're even more tired because you took lunch. Now, don't misunderstand this here. You have to take lunch. The proctor's not going to allow you to sit in the lab center or bypass lunch. Everybody has to leave for a half-hour lunch period, okay? Now, Cisco's going to provide you lunch. They try to make all dietary needs met, so there's going to be salad here for vegetarians. There's going to be like grilled chicken or some pasta. There's going to be some cookies for those of you guys that have a sweet tooth, maybe some chips, a couple cans of soda, and some water. So they try to make sure that everybody has you know, their dietary needs met. You can bring your own lunch again, and I explained that in the first video of this series, that they will ask to see your lunch to make sure that you're not trying to smuggle anything in. But you've gotten back from lunch and now you've eaten a meal and you're even more tired. If you're those guys that are sugar high, well, you're going to be good for the first 2 hours of configuration and then you're going to crash, right? You're going to fall asleep, right? This is going to be I want to say, the most physically challenging piece of your exam, okay? Let's take a look at it. Again, you see the diagram behind me. It's not terribly different than what we saw in troubleshooting. Same size topology, same amount of devices, but a different topology overall. The menus across the top are going to be very, very similar with the exception of these two. So for this discussion, I'm only going to concentrate on essentially these two because same, 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 same. Okay? They're all going to be generally the same. If you click End Session, you're done. Help in Settings, same thing. Manage Devices, same thing. You can console, you can reboot your devices, etc. Important Guidelines, this is where it's going to tell you not to add any additional interfaces or add any, you know, you can't add, when I say interfaces, I mean loopbacks, obviously. You're not allowed to configure any new IP addresses or anything like that. Essentially, what you have is what you get, unless you're specifically asked to violate one of those principles. In other words, they may ask you to create a loopback, in which case you would create that one loopback. But don't go creating them on your own. You know, I heard a story once, a very funny story, to me anyway. Some guy took his lab exam and knew that he was going to fail, knew that he was just done. I mean, he was in his config section and knew that he didn't have a prayer. And so what he did was he spent 5 hours configuring loopback addresses on all of the devices so that no matter what device you were on, when you pinged that address, it would be successful because each device had loopback addresses to everybody else's IP addresses, and so you had full reachability. I thought that was kind of clever. But essentially, again, here, I'm just going to concentrate on these two buttons here, the requirements and the additional diagrams. Now, in the lab, the config section is exactly like the troubleshooting, where if I click on any one of these devices, it's going to pop my telnet client. Now, you notice something different about this topology, and I just circled them, and that's these switches that are in the middle. And you also notice that I have this switch here that's actually cabled into my devices. It is important for you to understand that this is my layer 3 drawing, okay? It's actually a combination of layer 2, layer 3. What do I mean by that? Well, physically here, it looks like router 9 is cabled into switch 1. And it tells me Ethernet 00 here, and it just tells me .14 there. I don't know if you guys can read it. That's why I'm expressing it to you. Tells me here that there is a VL910. That VL is going to stand for VLAN. So I have another one here, here, and here. And I have more throughout this topology, so there's more VLANs that are associated. Even though router 9 looks to be directly cabled into switch 1, that doesn't mean that it necessarily is. Router 9 could be going into switch 2 and then connecting to switch 1. So this is not going to be my layer 2 diagram, essentially showing me all the physical cabled connections that are done within my virtual rack at Cisco. This is telling me my traffic pattern. Where should the packets flow within my network? Your job is to make this so. Now, the problem that I find in most cases here is, how do I go and create all these different VLANs here, right? How do I go through this? And what I want to do is I want to bring in my command prompt here. And this is just my command prompt. And what I want to do is I want to show you guys just how I did this. So I see all these VLANs here, right? I see in my diagram, I see that I have these VLANs listed here. So I have a VLAN here. I have a VLAN here. I have all these, right? And it's telling me on each router what the interface is on each router that's connected that needs to be an access port essentially as a member of that VLAN. Now, in case you're wondering, these 3 switches here in my layer 3 diagram are telling me that these switches are involved at layer 2, but they are not involved at layer 3, meaning these guys are just my pass-through switches. So what I would do here, now forgive me, this is only a command window, right? So the commands aren't going to work, but what I would do here is say show CDP neighbor. Okay, at that point, what would happen when I do show CDP neighbor in this telnet window here, okay, so in here, it's going to print out for me the list of all the devices on this switch that are plugged in. At that point, I can say, all right, I'm on switch 2, and I see that I'm connected to router 9, and I see that my local interface could be Ethernet 00, and I see that my remote interface on router 9 is Ethernet 00. So what am I going to do? Now I know that I need to go onto my Ethernet 00 and I need to say switch port mode access, switch port access VLAN 910. So that's how this is going to be laid out. And what I always recommend to my students, and a lot of them disagree at first, but 98–99% of them always come around, is don't use the layer 2 diagram that Cisco gives you, because you got to imagine you have 20-something routers, you have 8 to a dozen switches or 8 to 10 switches. That's a big physical diagram to really look at. And it's going to take you time to match the physical diagram to the logical diagram that you see behind me here. And Cisco's already given you the interfaces, again, right here. They've already given you these interfaces that the devices are connected to. So using CDP neighbor, you can easily go into these devices here and see who's connected to who and put them in the right access VLAN, okay? And you see this example here again, all right? So, that's not what I wanted. Just delete that. All right. So, this is how I would approach, and this is in fact how I did approach the configuration section in my lab. All right. I just simply brought up my telnet session here for switch 1 or switch 2, show CDP neighbor, and I began to put all these interfaces into the right VLAN, okay? I did not use the layer 2 diagram at all. In fact, I wasn't even positive if they gave you a layer 2 diagram because I didn't use it. I was done with the layer 2 portion of my config section within 30 minutes, okay? And it can absolutely be done. And I've had a lot of students that go through and they try to match up the layer 2 diagram with the layer 3 diagram, and it takes them an hour and a half to finish layer 2. Then I have students that use my method and just do show CDP neighbor, and they get proficient at that, and they move up their time to about a half hour. So it can be done. I'm recommending it to you for a reason. You don't have to use my method. You could use another method, as long as it helps you to save time, as long as it helps you to get it done quickly. All right, so now this is again going to be the background to your diagram. So just like in troubleshooting, this topology here is going to be the background. It cannot change. No matter what you load, this diagram always stays the same, and all of these are going to be hotspots. Now, when you click on requirements, The requirements, hang on one second here, guys. Let me just get this perfect here. So the requirements are going to, just like in troubleshooting, they're going to expand the list of requirements. So you're going to have all these requirements here. The thing to note about these requirements, and what I want you to focus on, is that they are in order based on the blueprint. So the CCIE version 5 Lab blueprint, by the way, and I'm having a thought here while I'm speaking, that's why I just stopped in the middle of dead sentence. There is two different blueprints. You realize that for route and switch. We have a written blueprint, we have a lab blueprint. They are very similar, but they are also very different. Make sure you download the right blueprint. Make sure it says lab on it. But these are going to be laid out in the section of the blueprint. Now, that's a good thing, and it's also a bad thing. What do I mean by a bad thing? Well, I'm going to scroll up here for a second, back to my main diagram. And I believe it's going to be over on this side. So here you see here, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I have a tunnel interface here, and then I have 3 tunnel interfaces here. Now, I don't know again if you guys can see it, but I have EIGRP 555 running right here, and I also have EIGRP 555 running down here. So I have EIGRP, I have an IGP that needs to extend over a DMVPN. Well, in order for me to do this, I have to have BGP running between these guys. In order for me to have physical reachability between the physical interfaces, in order for me to actually have reachability to the tunnel interfaces, right? I mean, that's kind of the order of operations. However, let me scroll back down to my requirements list here, and I want to show you something. The requirements that I need to do are going to be in these following sections. So the first half of section 3.0 is going to be IGP. So I'll write it over here. So we're going to have our IGPs first, and then IGPs, and then we're going to have our EGPs. Okay? So EIGRP in here, and BGP over here. So what comes first? The first thing that I'm going to read in my lab is going to be EIGRP over that DMVPN tunnel. But I haven't gotten to the BGP section that tells me how I need to get reachability between essentially this ISP here that you see in the background and the rest of those routers, the hub and spokes. I haven't gotten to it yet because I'm still in the first half of section 2.0, which is my layer 3 technologies. Well, so I need to do this first before I do this. But I'm already in this section. That means I need to skip this section, make a note of it, write it down on my piece of paper, skip it, and go down to the BGP section. Once I get BGP up and running, can I go back to EIGRP? No, I can't. Why? Because I need to get the DMVPN up and running before, between the hub and spokes before I go to the EIGRP section. That means I need now to leave section 2.0 and I need to go to my DMVPN section, which is in my VPN technologies, and I need to get my DMVPN up and running. Once I get my DMVPN up and running, I can cycle back to that EIGRP section. Now I know that sounds confusing, but believe me, if you do not do it in that order or something like that order, okay, you don't have to use the order of operations that I'm telling you, okay? I've had many students that say, you know what, I did it another way, it was very similar, but I did it my own way and it worked out perfectly. Regardless what method you use, every single student that I've had that said I went down bullet point by bullet point by bullet point by bullet point have said I failed. And they all said I was so confused, I didn't even know what to do with myself. You cannot go down bullet point by bullet point. You will get yourself completely confused. You will not know what's going on, okay? What you need to do is you need to think like an engineer. That's what I tell my students. Think like an engineer. If I walked into a company and they said, hi JP, how you doing today? I would say, hi, how are you? And they would say, you know, we need to get a DMVPN up and running between our centralized office or our California headquarter office and these 3 remote offices that we have. You know, we just got our service provider up and running, so can you help us? I would say sure. The first thing I would make sure is that I have service provider reachability between all of these hub and spoke interfaces, right? I mean, think like an engineer. What would you do first? You wouldn't go down the bullet points that the company gives you because you're an IE, you know better. Okay? You're not going to go down the bullet points that Cisco gives you because you're an IE. Cisco has purposely put things in that order for a reason, to confuse you. You have to think through that and think like an engineer. So what would I do first? The first thing I would do is I would say, hey, I want to get reachability first between my hub and spokes. I need to make sure that the public interface or my serial interface here, 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 and here, I need to make sure they can physically reach one another, because that physical interface is going to be what I'm using as the source interface for my DMVPN. Once I do that, in order for me to get EIGRP up between these two locations, sorry about that, I accidentally erased my line. In order for me to get EIGRP up and running between these two locations, assuming I have this service provider reachability, is what? I need to next build my tunnel. So that's going to be my step 2, right? So this is step 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, step 1 here, and my step 2 is my tunnel. Then I'm going to build my tunnel interface. So I build my tunnel essentially between these guys here. Sorry for the mess, I'm not Bob Ross. I'm not a painter, I'm a CCIE. So now I've essentially completed my DMVPN tunnel. Now I can light up EIGRP between these 2 or 4 or 5 or however many locations you're going to have in your lab. So you need to tackle your config section as an engineer. You need to think like an engineer. You cannot go and say, well, I'm going to do all these things by bullet point, because what's going to happen is when you get to that golden moment, what is the golden moment? Every single CCIE lab has what we call a golden moment. It's the moment where they ask you to verify that something works. And every lab, every track has it. I don't know what they are in other tracks because I'm a route and switch guy. When you get to that golden moment in your lab, they're going to say, perform this task and this is what you should get. And you're going to perform that task and it's not going to work. And because you've gone down all these bullet points in exact order, you are literally going to have absolutely no clue on what's not working and why. You have to think like an engineer and actually deviate from the bullet points that they're giving you and go at it from a logical perspective, not the way that they give it to you, all right? And I really hope that that's clear. So when you click on that particular section, so here I've gone ahead and said, I want to load section 1.0, which is going to be the first one you have to hit for everybody, because reachability first, right? Thinking like an engineer. Reachability first. You're going to load that, you're going to click on requirements, you're going to click on section 1. It's going to load a second page. It's going to be a pop-up page, just like we saw in troubleshooting. It's going to give you the total amount of points. It's going to say this is your section, your layer 2 section. Then what it's going to do is it's going to lay out the requirements for different sections, and it's going to give you the points. Now, these could be, depending on the version of lab you get, these could be based on autonomous system. It could be based on an office. There's different revisions of this exam, and so you're going to have to read, okay, where am I performing this configuration task, and what do I need to do? In order, just like we saw with Diag, in order for you to get these 2 points, and they're very low points, it's not like 1 or 2 points. In order for you, I'm sorry, it's not like 4 or 5 points. In order for you to get these 2 points, you have to accomplish every one of these bullet points. There is no half credit. If I do not get this bullet point, I do not get the 2 points, period. You have to accomplish all bullet points under that section in order for you to accomplish and get those points. Now, Cisco is going to give you some one-off features here and there in your bullet points, in your requirements that you may not know. The way that Cisco has laid this out is that it's not like you can skip the whole section. For example, if I skipped this whole section behind me that I've kind of scribbled on, I wouldn't have any reachability between my devices. So can I skip it? No, I have to perform all of those tasks. However, the one task that I may not know, or the one I might be confused on, is going to be one that is not essential for the lab to work. So if I don't know it, I'm going to have to skip it. I'm going to have to make that conscious choice to leave those 2 points behind and continue on in my lab, but my lab is still going to work. If I just skip this entire section, nothing's going to work because I haven't created my VLANs, I haven't done any of that. You know, they may give you a one-off feature in RIP, for example, and you may say, well, I don't know how to do that in RIP. But you're still going to have to perform the other 3 or 4 tasks in RIP in order for your routing to actually work. That one-off task is not going to prevent RIP from actually working and actually routing and actually doing what it's supposed to do. It's going to be some type of administrative feature that they're going to want you to add or change, all right? So be aware of that. You can't just, there's not going to be partial credit. And that's what some folks that I talk to are confused on. They think that, well, you know, each bullet point is going to be just a small percentage of those points. No, it's all or nothing. All the bullet points for the section for the 2 points, or you miss one, you don't get any. So We're going to go down here. We're going to accomplish all of these tasks. When you're done with layer 2, that will tackle all of your layer 2 requirements. When you're done with section 2.0 for layer 3, that's going to tackle all of your routing requirements. Each and every single one of these are going to be based again on what you see in the blueprint. Okay, so you're not going to have any DMVPN requirements here. You're going to have the routing requirements over the DMVPN here, but your DMVPN requirements are going to be here in VPN. Same thing with your layer 3 VPN, your MPLS requirements, etc. They're all going to be in your VPN requirements. You're not going to find any of those in your layer 3 because they're not in the layer 3 section. Okay. Now, that being said, when you click on any one of these sections, it is going to open up a separate page that gives you all of those requirements. You can then minimize this, you can close it, you can keep it up on another screen. I'm going to scroll up and tell you quickly what I did. I opened up, just like I said before, I think in the troubleshooting section, I opened up every single device in numerical order. So I started with my switches, switch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then I started with my routers, router 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 27 or whatever the max I had. And then in this case, I would end with maybe my ISPs. So I would say ISP 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so that's how I would open up all these devices. The drawback, again, remember in my first video that these machines aren't incredibly fast. They are pretty slow, and if you open up, the more windows you have open, the more resources that you're going to use. And so for me, I sacrificed leaving the requirements open all the time for leaving all my PuTTY windows open all the time. It was less confusing for me. So I would go and I would click on my requirements. I would read through the requirements of that particular section. I would close them. I would go to that section. I would configure it the way that I wanted to. I would go up to requirements. Sorry, let me scroll back up over here. I would click on requirements. I would then, click the section, read through this section again, make sure and verify that I did it properly. Then I would scroll down and read the next set of instructions. I would close this out. And that's how I managed my system resources. You don't have to take my recommendation. You guys need to come up with your own, but do something. You have to do something in a way that's going to help you to manage the lab and manage the requirements. Okay. Now, additional diagrams. This is going to be one of the most important things that you could not forget. So in the additional diagrams, again, this section of your lab never changes. The background of your lab here, all these devices, they never change. They're always there. Every additional window that you open up is always going to be a pop-up window. However, this is one of your golden tools that Cisco's given you. This is actually going to show you packet paths in your different technologies. So for example, here what I'm highlighting in red is actually a VRF that we have in our particular network diagram. So here, under the VPN diagram, under the VPN requirement, I'm actually showing you this is how this VRF is supposed to traverse the network. Looking at the main diagram, if I scroll back up, looking at the main diagram, I honestly have no idea how the VRF is supposed to route, who it's supposed to go to. I don't really have a clue. It's on there on the diagram. Okay, so it is here, it is listed here, so I do have some idea that we are going to have this VRF in some way, shape, or form, but I don't know how it's going to route. I don't know what the requirements are around the VRF by itself. However, under the additional diagrams section, get my pointer back, under the additional diagrams, I can now see that this VRF is supposed to route to these spokes here. Okay, this is a PE router. It outlines that here. This is a P router, PE router. And so it tells me these are all PE routers. So now I know how to configure them. Okay, so you're going to have additional diagrams. You're going to have additional resources. For example, your layer 2 diagram. You're going to have an extra, maybe a BGP diagram, maybe one for IPv6. I mean, it depends on the version of lab that you get, but you're going to have additional diagrams to look at that's going to give you more information based on that technology that you're looking at. So if you're in the BGP section and you're just confused out of your mind on how BGP is supposed to work, if you see that I'm supposed to peer with this ISP and you really just have no idea on how you're supposed to do that, may be a good idea for you to go in and look at your additional BGP diagram or maybe your VPN diagram, which is the one that I have up right now, so that you can see exactly how your layer 3 VPN is going to be configured and how it's going to work, and that is what's going to give you the right the right basis in order for you to configure BGP properly. So you're going to have to leverage all these different resources together to come up with these requirements, all right? So the config section is not going to be really hard. It's going to be more time consuming than anything. You're going to have to really be fast. You're going to have to really just understand how protocols work, how they work. You're going to have to understand that technology, and you're going to have to go through all of these requirements in an order that makes sense. That is probably the biggest tip, the biggest thing that I could give you is do not follow these by bullet point, meaning do not follow them by section. So I don't expect you 1, 2, 3, 4, and then maybe here you ran out of time. No, you're going to have to do maybe something like this. Maybe you tackle this one first, you tackle this, let's say 2, let's say 2.5, 2.5, right? And then you go here, but you do that 3.5, and then you come back here for 4, and then you come back here for 5, and then this is 6 and 7, right? So you're going to have to go back and forth between these sections. You absolutely have to think like an engineer. If you don't think like an engineer, you're going to have a lot of problems getting through the config section if you go bullet point by bullet point. So again, reach out to me with any questions. I try to give you guys as much information as I really can. I'm always available for questions. It may take me longer to respond, but you know, that's part of my job. So I will respond. Just have patience with me. I will do my best to get back to you with regards to any of your questions. But I hope this video has kind of shed some light on the exam sections that you're going to go through, and keep on studying and get those numbers.